All right, guys, welcome back. Today we are going to be talking a bit about two-point perspective and how it works in a picture. And that's kind of the next, jump over one-point perspective. And it's a little more complex than that, but not too horribly. So what we're going to try to do here to start out is we're going to place down some of the things that we need for perspective drawing, right? Perspective drawing fits in a larger concept known as technical drawing. So it takes a ruler, right? And a really need a ruler to draw perspective properly. And then, once you get a little better at it, you can start to freehand things, but you need to be able to draw very straight lines. So the ruler is a really good way to help out. So we need a line that goes all the way across the page. This will signify the horizon. And it is known as the horizon line. And the horizon, of course, is kind of that imaginary space. I mean, you could see the space, but you can't actually travel to the space. And it's the space where the sky, that'll be this upper part of the rectangle here, right? This section up here, meets the ground, and the ground will be represented by this lower section that's down here. And then as you kind of get farther away and you start thinking about how things work out in space, one of the things that you really need to think about is something called vanishing points. Now, vanishing points in a one-point perspective, there's just one, but here in a two-point perspective, there's 2 points, right? 2 vanishing points, and that's where it gets its name, two-point perspective, right? So two-point perspective kind of works under the idea that you're looking at something from its corner. So let's take a moment maybe now, and then I'll show you some examples. So one-point perspective is something that we can see a lot of the times in areas around us, and it's pretty easy to identify through the converging lines, right? So if we're kind of looking at this particular piece here, you can see down the hallway here at school really kind of looks like it's going or pinching down to a central spot here. And these actually become the converging lines of a one-point perspective. So if I just kind of take my ruler along the edge of the hallway here out towards the door, you can see that this angle is something that creates these converging lines that we would use in a one-point perspective line drawing. And it gives it a sense of depth, right, of movement out into the distance. And all of these lines converge together in the center of this right here, what's also known as the vanishing point. Besides these converging lines and the vanishing point, the other thing that we're kind of missing from the image is something called the horizon line, right? And the horizon line is that invisible line. In this case, it's an invisible line, but it's kind of an imaginary line, although you can see it, but it's not physically there. If you try to go to the horizon line, you'll never actually make it. But it's kind of where the sky meets the ground, right? The sky meets the ground. So it's these things that make up a one-point perspective. And I'm sure that you know this because you've probably covered one-point perspective before. Let me show you another example. All right, let me show you how two-point perspective plays out in these photographs that I took from around school. So if we're thinking of our converging lines, and 2-point perspective, we can actually find those converging lines on these images by using a ruler and then just kind of tracing them out. So if I say this one starts here and goes out in this direction, right? And then I can have one here that comes out as well. Let's pull this back just a little smidge. All right, and then there's one that's so obviously right here that we can trace this out again, and we can see the 2-point on the horizon would actually, or one of the 2 points on the horizon will actually be found out over there. And if we do the exact same thing here, we take this image and we take this converging line and trace it out this way for a while. And then take this bottom converging line from here make sure I get it all nice and lined up, and then out in this direction, we can see again that we have the second point of the 2-point perspective found here. So then that places our horizon line right along the center of these two. And that horizon line could be drawn in by just taking a nice big long yardstick in this case, because my other was too small, that little foot long ruler there was too small, and then, you know, I get that horizon line right along the inside here. All the rest of these lines we could just keep on tracing right down, right? So even the converging line that makes up the roof in here, we could, you know, think about it, you know, actually existing, right? Or even the roof, the slope of the roof that's back here, we can see that it's actually a converging line that, you know, comes into this area as well. So all of these lines end up being, even the bottom of this fence here, right, end up being, end up converging along those areas. All right, and now I'm going to show you another example. Now, when we're setting up our 2-point perspective here, we need to really kind of think about that corner, right? So when we're thinking about the corner of something, everything in the 2-point perspective really does kind of go from that. And so how do you know how big the thing is going to be from the corner? Well, you're just going to make it up, right? So here I'm going to say that we're going to make a bit of a, this helps if you have a ruler actually. We're going to make a bit of a rancher style house, one like you see around town here. And so what we'll do is we'll create the corner of the house to begin with, but then we also want to really make sure that we're creating some kind of height to it at some point in time along here. So what I'm going to do is to bring this corner kind of out to the point using some converging lines like this. Sometimes you'll hear these called perspective lines or orthogonal lines, right? But I tend to like to call them converging lines because they converge on the point, right? And when we're thinking about that space, then we need to decide how wide kind of the side of this house is going to be. So I'm going to go with, I want this house to be wide, but not unbelievably wide, so somewhere in here. And then I want to think about the distance between here and here, but I'm also going to cut this towards the back just the slightest bit, because I think it makes more sense if it's just off center, right? I want it to be just off center here. And then I'm going to put in another vertical line, and these vertical lines are also called transversal lines, but I tend to just call them vertical lines because it's a nomenclature that you're already familiar with. So now, this will be, I don't know, maybe that's a little too tall for just a one-story rancher style house. So we'll say that's just a little bit shorter than that, and then we'll put in this edge, right? And then we can think about the roof line. And the roof line's obviously going to go from here and then across this front bit here, but I wanted to go a little bit past so that we have a bit of an overhang, just like all houses have, a little bit of overhang. And that's the, the reason why the rain doesn't just fall directly on your house, or if you step right up against the house, you stay dry as you go in the door, right? And then once we kind of have that overhang set up, I have to remember that the reality of this is that the actual house is going to have a corner that's up here, but then the overhang itself is going to actually have a line, a converging line that comes off of the overhang. So even though that corner of the house might be a little bit taller than that, we got to remember the converging line for the roof and not really for the corner of the house, right? And then we need a converging line that goes along here from our vertical or transversal line, right? And then hits the corner of the house going this way. Now this side of the house is indefinitely long. Oh, you know what else we forgot to do, or I forgot to do, is put in the converging line from the rooftop, right? So there's one in there, and then let's end this house somewhere, and then we'll make maybe a little play. A lot of times these houses have kind of little separate garages, and we'll try to stick in that little separate garage. So this vertical here is obviously going to get mirrored down here with another vertical ending the edge of the house, right? And then we need to make a parallel to this roof towards the back here. So if we take our ruler and just kind of stick it here, and then we can pull it back until we hit the corner of this vertical, and then just use it again, right? Oh, you know what? We need to pull that back just a little bit farther than that because we forgot about, forgot about the overhang, right? This line forgets about the overhang. We will make sure that we hit the overhang. Okay. So you can see this is very technical. You know, there is a lot of lines that need to go in here. There are a lot of planes that are taking place when we take a look at this as a whole image. But what this does is it keeps this drawing that we're making in perspective, right? And that helps quite a bit with making something that looks a little more realistic in your work. So then let's try to, I think a lot of these houses have like a little breezeway, and then they have a little detached or semi-detached, I guess, garage that's off the side of them. The ones that are here in town, at least. You know, there's plenty of other people that have other things in other towns, but in our town here in Millville, these houses tend to have little garages like this. Most of these houses were built right after World War II here in Millville, and so they have kind of this post-war era architecture to them. So these little houses are really part of that post-war era architecture. So this is really what 2-point perspective is good at, right? And you could even think about, you know, a lot of times there's like a stop sign. All types of fun stuff, right? So we could keep on kind of adding to this forever, but I'm just going to call it right there. On the other side of the street over here would also have a curb and a sidewalk and all that kind of stuff as well, but we're not going to get into that at all. You could put some, you know, other trees on the other side of the street as well if you really wanted to. Same thing back in here. You could have some trees off in the distance, that kind of thing. Would work unbelievably well for something like this. But that is, in a nutshell, what 2-point perspective is. It's a way of looking at something from the corner, right? Unlike 1-point perspective, we can only look down one street. In 2-point perspective here, now we can see down 2 streets simultaneously. All right, guys. Bye-bye.